Hi everyone, I would like to say a massive thank you to all of my subscriber base that has been supporting my podcast over the last year. Thank you for supporting its growth and interacting with the content. In 2024, I'm going to have lots more exciting interviews coming, so please remember to subscribe and continue to support the channel. Thank you. Eric D. Collins, it's an honor to have you on the platform. You are one of the most influential Black people in Britain. You grew up with President Obama, and you have a company called Impact X Capital. So thank you so much for coming on the platform.
Thank you for having me, Micah. Just one correction. I went to law school with Barack. So we met when I was already in my 20s. I grew up because he grew up in Chicago and in Kansas and in Hawaii. So he grew up at least Hawaii is exotic. And then I grew up in the American South. But we converged in Massachusetts when we both were in law school.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Eric. So you grew up in Alabama. You also studied with President Obama at Harvard Law School, and you held several influential roles in companies such as Time Warner and Touch Surgery. So please just tell us a bit about this.
Well, when I think about the journey that a CEO makes, it's never sort of linear. There are many unexpected turns. There are many twists. There are many sort of reversals of fortune. And I had the privilege of and suffered from all of those during my career. Having grown up in the South during the Civil Rights Movement, where there was segregation was actually the law of the region. It was being dismantled slowly by the federal courts, but I mean, we still had segregation as an approach. And I was growing up, I was born on a Black college campus in the United States, and then moved to North Carolina, which is still in the American South. And so those dynamics, the reason I mention them is those dynamics are sometimes not necessarily considered the attributes that you would then find in a person who eventually gets the CEO suite. And the CEO role for me came about over a period of time. There are a lot of different companies in which I worked, started companies on my own, started companies with partners, joined companies by other people. And it is that sort of roundabout way of getting to what is now, a successful entry into the CEO suite. I'm not sure that the company is doing well, but I'm not sure I would declare it success at this point.
Thank you so much for that. And just following on from that, you mentioned segregation. What was it like growing up in segregation? Because many of us have read about it, but what was it like growing in that time?
Well, I was very young at the time. So in my infancy, it would have been very much the experience my parents would have as conscious adults, people who were living as adults in a space, raising children. The thing to really focus on is my parents were raising children in a segregated environment, which is kind of interesting. It means that they were very optimistic about the future. It's that they did not believe that the world that existed was going to be the world that had to exist. So they had aspirations for and could see a path where their children had a different set of experiences than they did. But segregation is a very insidious system, right? It affects, as there's a famous court case that actually struck down segregation, that it stated that indeed the hearts and minds of children who were raised in segregation were going to be so impacted by that experience that they might never actually be able to recover. I'm paraphrasing. That is in itself, that recognition that there is something about that kind of a system. And segregation, for people who don't know, is this idea that there is going to be, at its best, I'll put that in quotation marks, it was going to be separate but equal. So there would be separate but equal transportation. There'd be separate but equal housing facilities. There'd be separate but equal education. What we found is there was separate but not equal. They're separate and unequal. And that those were the experiences of Black people in the South and de facto in the North for a long, long period of time, hundreds of years in the United States. And my sort of experience with that is, having been born under segregation, but having been raised under desegregation and integration, then, I'm a first generation, or one of the first generations, that actually from the very beginning of my education and the beginning of my housing choices and that sort of thing, there's not an explicit government rule about keeping the races separate. And people are familiar with South Africa. That's South Africa and apartheid. Those are some of the types of things, which is a bit more recent example of the same sort of dismantling of a system of oppression.
And later on in your life, you studied at Harvard Law School with President Obama. So please tell us a bit about what that was like.
One of the things that I always encourage people is one of the best investments you'll ever make is your investment in education and experience. And so if people are saying, should I get a degree, or should I actually just go out into the world and start working? If your intention is to maximize your earning potential, if your intention is to increase your opportunity set, sort of what opportunities are presented to me and which ones I can actually utilize, what I would say is that it is through education that particularly underrepresented people give themselves a larger opportunity set from which to consider. So for me, going to school was never in question, and continuing on, it was, what is the best investment that I can make with the information that I have and at this stage in my life to allow me to be as flexible and have many options as possible as I age. What I found is that going to Harvard Law School, Harvard is something that everyone knows. It is probably the best known educational brand in the world. And it is not an educational brand which is thought of as being it's okay. It's considered to be extraordinary. And so to have that brand, and they're not a huge, of the billions of people who are in the world, they're, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions who have had that experience of Harvard and Harvard education. And not just sort of for a course, but for, matriculated in a very competitive program to get in, and then a competitive program to get out, and then a competitive program to then find work. It's all competitive. And so all of those things help for other people to be able to say about Eric and the other people that attended law school with me, that these are people who have shown grit. Many people that I talk to show their grit, their ability to overcome challenges by their upbringing, right? So the upbringing was, I grew up in tough circumstances and I was able to escape those tough circumstances, and now I'm giving back to the community. The thing which is sometimes missing from that are some of the credentials that are associated with, when having gotten exit velocity, i.e., I have been able to propel myself out of those initial circumstances. What do I do with that exit velocity, and how does that then impact other people around me? And for me, that's been extremely important. So law school was for a young Eric, because I went when I was 22, I guess, until I was 25, was a very important piece of expanding my option set, is a very important piece in terms of expanding my network of people with whom I continue to work and whom I continue to be friends with, and help to increase my impact. It gave me air cover such that when people look at me and they look at my background, it affords me a certain amount of grace, because people are like, oh, well, that's something that he's done. That's an extraordinary achievement, which we can just say objectively. And so therefore we might listen to him a little bit longer. We might actually invite him in to have a meeting. We might actually lend money to him. We might give money to him to invest for us. There are all sorts of things that come from that, which are a benefit. And I don't think sometimes people don't focus on all those benefits that are downstream benefits. What we do focus on is capital that is in our pocket today. But if the game is having as much capital at the end of the day, then I think it sort of helps us to focus a little differently on what the investments we're making when we're younger.
Thank you so much. And following on from that, you were on Obama's Council of Small Business Administration, Council of Underserved Communities. Please tell us about what you did in this role.
The Small Business Administration is one of the organizations the government established, I think it's back in the 1960s, in order to try and increase the amount of entrepreneurship in the country. This also, you see sort of echoes of that here in the UK, Tech Nation and other sorts of places. There, Innovate UK. There are a bunch of programs that have been established in order to be able to help people to go into entrepreneurship in high and fast growth areas. In the United States, you have what is called set-asides that are associated with government contracting. So if you're contracting with the federal government, the government determined, because of past issues of racism and discrimination, that it made sense, instead of just awarding the contract for whatever reason. Sometimes it's because of patronage, because these people supported me, et cetera. We've seen all that here in the UK. You get your PPE, you do all sorts of, but you have all sorts of overruns because you're friendly with whomever, the prime minister or someone else. But instead of just using that as one of the criteria, another criteria is, are you helping underserved communities? And so that is a great program, and it's helped to create a lot of businesses, particularly as suppliers of services and products to the federal government in the United States, which is the biggest buyer of services in the United States. Beyond that, and of course, we're using taxpayers' money. So it's my money, it's my parents' money, it's my siblings' money, it's my nieces and nephews' money that's actually my godchildren's money that's actually going into these programs. So to have some of that come back into these communities and help these communities is great, through establishing and helping these businesses to grow and flourish in the supplier market. What we found over years, and these programs have been in place for decades, is that it seems as though companies that are started by underrepresented people, this is women, people of color, veterans, older entrepreneurs, people with disabilities, that all of those people most of them get to a certain point and they can't sort of increase their earnings over that. So they get to a small, medium-sized company, but they can never get to be a large company. And part of the point of our council is to try and uncover why and what were some solutions for that, so that we could actually get, with the work that I do now, it's the same sort of a thing. We are investing in early stage companies with the intention not just of doing one investment, but in terms of helping them to become, giant behemoths of industry. And the only way to do that is to make sure that there are other things involved. It cannot just be that you give one check and that's sufficient. There's all sorts of other things that happen. There are multiple checks that are necessary. There are good connections, which are appropriate. There are networking, which is appropriate, etc.
Thank you so much. And please tell us a bit about your company, Impact X Capital, because it's a very interesting venture. You had a lot of very important partners and people that helped to found the company, such as Lenny Henry, Ezechi Britton, to name a few. So please just tell us a bit about it.
So ImpactX is a venture capital company. We invest in innovative disruptors in the UK and Europe. We are looking for people who think that the world is not perfect as it is, and there are ways of making it better. And the way that they are making it better is by creating companies of scale that are solving problems. They are solving problems in digital technology, health, education, well-being, and media and entertainment. Those are the three areas in which we focus. Underrepresented means that they are people who other venture capital firms don't invest in. So we want to look at a differentiated deal flow. And we found this to be a very productive way of looking not only for the pipeline of entrepreneurs, but then also the returns that we're looking at, because we're a for-profit organization, and that is our major purpose, to return capital to our shareholders. We call them limited partners. And those limited partners expect that, but we also expect that we're going to do something that's going to have lasting impacts upon the ecosystem. And part of that is by creating jobs that are future-resistant jobs at the founder level, C-suite, on boards, as well as within P&L responsible roles, profit and loss roles, as well as in the engineering organization. So we are investing, and we spend a lot of time trying to search out the right kinds of companies that are going to return capital and create a lot of jobs, and that those jobs and the capital they return and the jobs that they create are going to be part of a very nice circle of a virtuous circle that releases capital. And that release of capital, because based on exits and based on sales of companies, will allow more people to be benefited by this. And so we have a flywheel effect. So in my opinion, and what we have been doing since we started in 2018, was investing in a future vision where the status quo is disrupted by women and people of color, people with disabilities, LGBTQ plus, older entrepreneurs who are actually out there changing the world, but with somewhat of a different mindset than you find in the typical venture capital portfolio.
Thank you so much. And even following on from that, what has been your most successful investment to date?
We have a lot of them.
That's good.
So one of them, which is interesting, I'll talk about two. One is a company called Marshmallow, which is a British company started by identical twins, Oliver and Alexander Kent Braham. That company was started with an interesting mission to make sure that people who are expats in the UK are not being overcharged premiums for their insurance, particularly their auto insurance. And this company found that that up to the people who are expats whose driving record didn't follow them when they came to the UK paid 5 times what other people paid for their insurance premiums, which could make it unaffordable. And if what you are doing is taking your kids back and forth to school and you need the car, if what you're doing is you have a job that requires, licensure, that sort of thing, all of these things are challenges which make it impossible for you to actually take care of your community. So they started this organization using some AI and using a little bit of data science in order to be able to connect the driving record of their of people who are seeking premiums with their application, so that then they could actually get better rates. That organization has been growing at an exponential rate. When we invested at a 30 million pre-money valuation, I think in 2020, and 18 months later, they were at a 1.2 billion valuation. This summer, they announced that they were EBITDA positive, meaning they were doing about 750K of EBITDA. So after earnings before interest, tax, amortization, depreciation, et cetera, those that they were actually doing that. So they were now in a position with the growth that they were seeing of being sort of a well-known entity. This is an organization that was named by the Financial Times earlier this year as the second fastest growing company in Europe. So that's the second fastest in Europe. It's not the second fastest Black company in Europe. It's the second fastest company not in the UK, but in Europe. The two founders are number 51 and 52 on the technology entrepreneur rich list. And they are, prepared, showing us that you can do all of this and still hire a bunch of women and people of color. As of our reports last year, and we reported them earlier this year, they had 50% of their employees were women and 20% of people who were in key roles, like the ones that we're interested in, the board, the founders, the C-suite, the P&L responsible roles, as well as the engineering organization, are people of color. So we have that as an example of a very successful approach to our double bottom line. First of all, the financial returns, and secondarily, creating jobs that are future resistant and future appropriate. And then we have other companies. We have companies like, which is interesting because we have a company called Aide, which is actually a project. We know that people of color and women, et cetera, over-index in terms of certain industries, and one is entertainment. And is there a way to invest with venture scale returns in the entertainment industry? Direct series television is one of those ways, and animation in particular. So we partnered with a graphic novelist in the United States named Roya Coupe, who had produced a thing he called the Unique Universe. It had 10 graphic novels in it. He was doing a deal with Dark Horse, who's the third biggest graphic novel publisher in the United States after Marvel and DC Comics. And they do Game of Thrones. They did Stranger Things. So, they've Umbrella Academy. They've got a lot of names that people would know. And so he had done a deal with them. We decided to take an equity interest in one of his projects, a project called Ianu, about a young Black girl who discovers her superpowers on puberty and starts to help in Africa to help, along with her set of friends, her community, to actually overcome some challenges. And so we have a superhero as a girl. We have an African story. We have an African writer. We put it together with an African American animation company, Lionforge. It won an Oscar for Hair Love. We then put it together. We are doing the animation in Korea and Japan. And we got a deal with HBO for 2 series, so a series, and then 2 movies, so 2 films. So that is an example of another investment which is doing very well.
It's incredible that you said Marshmallow, because I've actually heard of them. I read about them on the Financial Times. Yeah. And it also flows nicely into my next question, because I've also read about you on the Financial Times.
Okay.
And the Power List. So what do you hope that your legacy will be going forward, and why is representation so important?
Oof. I hope my legacy is, I haven't really thought about my legacy, but if I had to think about my legacy, I would hope that it would be that he made good trouble. I believe that good trouble is a very consequential and important part of the narrative that needs to be engaged by people of color, women, underrepresented people in general, because the idea that by not making good trouble, we're going to change the world to a place that's better for us all I don't see that happening. So my issue that I constantly face and that I constantly focus on is how to bring people along in making good trouble and then amplify the trouble that we make. Again, it's good trouble. And sort of making sure that not by asking permission, not by begging, do we actually then get to the point that we'd like to be, but then actually have controlling capital and controlling resources, that is a way to get things done. So hopefully that is part of the legacy, not just of myself, but of Impact X more broadly.
And in terms of what you said, you also wrote a book called We Don't Need Permission.
Mm-hmm.
I actually read it and I really enjoyed it.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you.
But for members of my audience that don't know about it, please tell us a bit about the book. So, and what the key takeaways would be from that book. I know what they are already, but
you do. You should tell me. Well, You Don't Need Permission was really written because I liked the title, quite frankly. I like the idea that in life, you can wait for people to say you're good enough. You can wait for people to say, please come and join us. You can wait for people to give you a place at the table. That reactive strategy has been one that we have used for millennia as underrepresented people in the world. And the question as to whether or not it makes sense on a go-forward basis is interrogated in this book. And if you don't believe that you should just wait to be invited in and that people have a change of heart and mind, and the sort of white supremacy will suddenly say, oh, we're finished with white supremacy and please join us as equal partners in this. If you believe that that's going to happen, then, maybe the book's not for you. But if you believe that you're going to have to make some good trouble in order to get a different kind of a world, then We Don't Need Permission is actually for you. And I go through discussing the experiences that I've had over decades of work in the private and public world, and talked about what are examples of not needing permission and how I would implement those on an individual basis and then on a group basis. So for me, it is actually a how-to book on how to create how to create good trouble. And in my estimation, that is done by building businesses. It is done by creating space for the execution of a disruptive and innovative plan. There are other ways of helping, certainly being in government, certainly being within corporations. However, when we look at sort of what is the impact that an individual can have in a short period of time and how an individual can change the center of gravity, we look at people like Kathy Hughes of Radio One. We look at people like Jeff Bezos of Amazon. We look at people like, Bill Gates of Microsoft. These are individuals who within their lifetime made substantial changes and were able to behave both with hard power and soft power as almost non-governmental agencies in the world. They were able to hire who they wanted. They were able to create products that they wanted. They were able to, after making money, address problems that they thought were absolutely important in the world. Those are things which, for the majority of Black people and women in the world, they don't control those types of resources, and it's particularly in the global South. So in order to be able to do something like this and to be able to have within a generation, which is about 12 years, to be able to have substantive change so that a few years from now, we're not talking about, the problems of Black Britain are that we are, 1 in 2 of us are living below the poverty line. And instead, we're talking about we've solved the problem of demographic bias in poverty, then we need to start creating these businesses and move them along.
Thank you. And Johnny C. Taylor Jr., a very senior figure in human resources in the USA, talked about how in 2024 there'll be a lot of organizations that'll be pushing against EDI policies. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that's nothing new, right? There have been I describe it. I sort of distill it down to white supremacy. There is a perception in the world in many different sectors, whether you're talking about religion, whether you're talking about business, whether you're talking about, in some ways, entertainment, in some ways, sports even, that indeed, when we're talking about the best, and we're talking about who's going to help you legally, who's going to help you in terms of finance, the people that come to mind are white people, particularly white men. And that sort of white supremacy remains very, very consistent. The question of, are people emboldened to go after DEI? I've never seen a period in which people have not been going after DEI. And we've talked about my background still living in a segregated economy. It's like, so that's nothing new. The question is, what do we do about it? And what are the tools that we're bringing to the equation? If what we're doing is we're hoping that, the government that's currently in power here in the UK is suddenly going to come to some conclusion and stop sending people who are trying to contribute to this country to, another country they've never heard of in order to be processed. How do we actually combat that? Do we combat it by sort of writing letters and marching? Absolutely. Do we also combat it by having capital that we then say, well, we will not be putting this capital to work with you until you start doing things that we want you to do? We just will not do it. And if you really want to bring us along, then you're going to have to bring us along in ways that we wish to be brought along. And what that will not be is that you'd consider us sort of within the, I call it magnum bar analysis, meaning what your perception is that we are just like you on the inside, a white, creamy, white supremacist thing. And on the outside, we're just a brown, this lovely brown coating and delicious coating on the top. But that indeed we're integrated from top to bottom in a different set of experiences. And those different sets of experiences lead us to define success somewhat differently and more broadly. And that we intend to bring that as an approach to the world. So in my opinion, DEI has constantly been under attack. I think, in some ways, I think rightly so, because I think it focuses on the wrong thing. I think DEI focuses on organizations that are dysfunctional. I mean, if you have a DEI experience because an organization doesn't have any senior Black women in leadership, that system is broken, because we know that there are sensational and fantastic Black women who should be running most of the organizations here in the UK. It has zero to do with competence, ability, even their networks. It has to do with something else. And the question of whether or not we want to spend our time trying to improve incrementally those organizations, which could take decades, if not centuries, to get them to actually come around, as opposed to starting organizations that at their basic core DNA say that women and people of color, people who are underrepresented in one way or another because they're gay, lesbian, transgender, queer, plus, those are the companies that I wish to spend my time on. I don't really spend my time on the other companies. We spend our time on companies that sort of make it their basis, that we think that DEI is part of our competitive advantage.
Thank you so much for that. And following on from that, do you think we'll see a similar trend in the UK? I know you talked about it slightly, but do you think we'll see a similar trend in terms of DEI?
What?
In terms of DEI being under threat within the UK, like it's predicted to be in the US in 2024?
Oh, I think DEI here in the UK is really on the back foot. I'm not confident that either of the political parties actually invest in it tremendously. I'm not sure that either of the, if so, we wouldn't have 1 in 2 Black children living below the poverty line, which we've had for years now. We've come up to year 7 almost of us having reported that there 1 in 2 Black children live below the poverty line, whereas 1 in 5 of their white colleagues live below the poverty line. Well, we look at companies and we think about who's in the C-suite, who's on boards, who has P&L responsible roles, who's running engineering organizations. Take the big companies that are in the FTSE 100, 200, 300, take small emerging companies. All of them suffer from the same thing. So in my opinion, there's never been a panacea here in the UK either, or in any other part of Europe, about the incorporation of underrepresented people into power within these organizations. And I don't believe that there is a likelihood that those organizations are going to be giving power and sort of negotiating power in the near term. Therefore, I think, we are in a system where DEI will constantly be under attack. Again, that's why I believe what we do is we start organizations, grow them to scale, like Marshmallow, like Ianu, where DEI is a competitive advantage. Build those organizations.
Thank you. And you were a star in Channel 4's series, The Moneymaker. Please tell us just a little bit about how this opportunity came about.
Well, Channel 4 had talked to Kalal Productions. Nick Parnes is the head of that organization, and he had actually acquired the rights to an American television format called The Prophet, which had been on at that time for about 7 years and very successful. It was the most successful show on CNBC, and NBC Universal owned CNBC. So he said, this is something that could work in the UK, and went out to cast. I don't know what happened in order to determine who would be part of the group that would be considered. I don't know who was considered. But at some point, the publicist for Impact X who also works with Tristan Capital, Rick Lewis, who is the chair of my board, that we share the same publicist, one of the same publicists, a Black female-run organization called ESPR, run by Eva Simpson and Colette Machado. I heard from them that there was this opportunity and that I should be considered. And so I started having a series of meetings, and that was it. I did not realize, and I'd never done a television show before. Well, not really. I'd not really done a television show before, and certainly not being the host and sort of the titular star of it. So, I didn't know that what it would take to get a television show on air. And when someone comes to you and says that they want to be a host of a show that actually is guaranteed to go on air, that's a huge thing. I didn't realize. I was just oblivious. I'm oblivious to a lot of things, and that was one of the things to which I was oblivious. So I auditioned as such, but my auditions weren't that I went to a studio and then auditioned. This all happened during COVID. I would have meetings on Zoom. I'd have meetings at sort of socially distanced restaurants, and eventually the group said, "We want you to be this particular person." I don't know who else they were with whom else they were speaking, but one day I'm the prophet. It's like, here's a contract. So that was that. But it was such a privilege to do the program, because the program itself is a nice platform for Impact X to talk about how we invest and how we look at objectively at opportunity, how we then leverage our network in order to, for the companies in whom we invest, in which we invest, that how we then leverage our networks in order to add value. So it was a perfect opportunity for us to show the UK, and then to show the UK how we work, but then to also show and we're very numbers driven, et cetera, but then to also show the UK about these companies. Because as you might notice, there were two of the companies were Black and run by two Black men, and two were run by two young white men. So we were able to also show where the demographics would say that 3.3% of Brits are Black, of African, Afro-Caribbean, African-American, et cetera, heritage. But here we have 50% of the businesses we're looking at. So, being part of that program meant that I got to make I get to have some conversations about that and make some decisions about who is going to be the companies that we're going to help. And I was pleased with that, and pleased with Nick from Kalal Productions, and pleased with my team, Becky and team at Channel 4 for the work that they were doing, and Alf. Also at Channel 4 for the work that they allowed us to do and the way they allowed us to put together that television show.
Thank you. And will there ever be a second season of The Moneymaker?
There could. There are always conversations about a second season. It's a timing question, and it is what do we want to accomplish in that second season? Is the second season more of the same, sort of finding companies around the country and putting money behind them and putting network behind them and seeing if we can get them to grow? Or is there something which is always using those examples and making them available in public to other organizations can identify with these entrepreneurs? That's great. Or is there another way of doing it that is equally impactful, equally fun for the audience, equally, as I learned the word, televisual, meaning that television-wise, it's interesting to see. So maybe there will be. We'll let you know.
Thank you. And the last question I'd like to ask you is, please tell us about any other projects you're going to be working on in 2024 to 2025.
Well, all the projects that we're really working on are the projects that are already ongoing. The first being spending time on Impact X. We are open for business and investing in companies. We have done 5 investments. We closed the first close of our next fund back in October. We've already made 5 investments. We are extremely focused on making capital available. So that's going to be the major focus for us. We're also looking at places that we haven't traditionally worked. So in our first portfolio, we had 26 companies and projects, and this one will have about 50. The size of this fund is exponentially larger than the first fund was. But in addition, we think that there's some places we might have missed during our first set of fund allocation. So we're going to go and try a few different things and a few different strategies. So you'll hear about those, and we're very excited about them. We'll continue working with sustainability because we believe that underrepresented people have a unique contribution to make in the sustainability world, whether or not we're talking about water, whether or not we're talking about energy consumption, whatever it is, that there are ways in which those people are absolutely fantastic. And that certainly in terms of digital and technology, that we will be spending a lot of time looking for the next great Marshmallow, the next great Aide. So that's what we're looking for.
Thank you so much, Eric, for being such a great guest. I've learned so much from your experiences, and I know that my audience will do too. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Micah. It was good being with you, and I hope your audience gets something out of this. You take care. Happy
Thank you.
holidays.
Thank you.